Good afternoon. Seeing lots of people come in. I'm seeing some people, Irene Oliver Lewis, Loie Fecteau, who is amazing. Michelle LaFlame, Sabrina Pratt is here, Sydney is here. We have so many other people. Cindy Graves is here. A lot of the people who have been instrumental in getting this work done. Thank you for being here. So people will continue to kind of roll in, but let's go ahead and get started. I am delighted to have with us today Representative Reena Szczepanski, who serves Santa Fe, and Senator Jeff Steinborn, who serves the southern part of New Mexico. And these are two of the champions who worked toward, they were the official champions on the legislative side, who worked to bring forward House Bill 8 in 2023. And we've asked them here today to share a little bit of the story. There were a lot of citizens who came forward as volunteers to work on this project to help get this bill envisioned and passed. And I see a lot of them here today. So I've asked the representative and the senator to join us today to share a little bit about that story, a little bit about what is the vision for what I'm going to call CID, which is the Creative Industries Division, CID. And that is the division that was formed as a result of the passage of House Bill 8 in 2023. The new division is parked under the Department of Economic Development. And so its mandate is to support creative industry companies and workers, to support the success of entrepreneurs in the creative economy, to help build creative industry-based economic opportunities and initiatives, and to support other departments, agencies like arts and culture, transportation, tourism, film, in being an effective champion and partner in fostering success in the creative economy. So, without much further ado, I'm Alice Loy, and thanks for joining us. I will hand it off to Representative Szczepanski to introduce yourself if you want to say anything more, and then share a little bit about the background on House Bill 8.
Sure. Thank you, Alice. It's so good to be here. I'm Reena Szczepanski. I'm a state representative in my first term, and I represent part of Santa Fe County, mostly central and east parts of that county. I also serve as House Majority Whip. It's so lovely to see so many of you listening who helped us pass House Bill 8. And the whole effort started actually in a meeting that I had in, I guess it was the spring of, it was the session of 22 when I was serving as chief of staff to Speaker Brian Egoff, and this group of very passionate experts and creatives came up with this concept for investment in creative industries. And it popped up late in the session, and it was really hard to move anything at that time. But later, when I actually decided to run for office myself and was sitting thinking, well, what do I want to work on? I could not stop thinking about that meeting. And I think that's a testament to how amazing the women that were at that meeting are. And I got in touch and we started working on it. And one of the reasons that it was such a captivating idea is that we have, a decade maybe to create a real economic diversification plan for New Mexico. So much of our revenue, meaning all the money that we use to pay for public schools, for healthcare, for roads and infrastructure, so much of that comes from the oil and gas industry right now. But we don't expect that trend can continue. It's not sustainable given sort of global forces in that industry.
Yeah.
And so we really have to figure out ways that we can have economic development all over the state in a way that is sustainable, in a way that reaches rural communities, small communities, large communities in equitable ways, and ways that lift up people of color and artists that are working in traditional crafts and arts, and sort of this whole. And so when you think about creative industries, it really is that. It really is the potentially a unicorn of economic development, similar to outdoor recreation, which my colleague on this bill, Senator Steinborn, has been such an outspoken champion for. And that, seeing the example of outdoor recreation and how that has really taken off, I think set a great example for what creative industries could be. So I'll pause there because I want Senator Steinborn to introduce, but it's a great story of how a few people coming together can really make a big difference.
Jeff, do you want to say a few words?
Yes.
Yeah, go for it.
A politician, happy to say a few words, of course.
Yeah.
But good evening, everybody. Great to be with you. And so it's it's one of these kinds of full circle moments where we're now celebrating something that we all worked really hard to create. And here we are talking about it, and talking about what the future will bring. So that's a fun exercise. But I'm State Senator Jeff Steinborn, for those that don't know me, from Las Cruces, and State Senator finishing up my second term in the Senate. And my district goes from central Las Cruces all the way north to Sierra County and includes historic parts of Las Cruces all the way through the Hatch Valley. So it's a really cool, diverse district. And, I've been a fan of the creative industries as a form of economic development, if I could put it that way, for a long time. And, seeing the success of Santa Fe, which kind of pointed, which became focused on that sector decades ago, and dedicating part of its public funding to the arts, and, blossomed into being one of the top art exporting towns in the world. I felt like Las Cruces for a long time also has our culture, has our richness, has our artistic expression, and even worked for a time on, creating an arts board that kind of melded these worlds. And then ultimately, a few years later, that actually happened, not from my efforts, but and then of course our beloved leader down south, Irene Oliver Lewis, who's on this call, we've been watching her for years talk about this creative economy. And so it was an idea whose time had come, really, as far as the legislature and our efforts to create a division. And so it's funny, parallel, or actually a little afterwards, but to, Reena's discussions in Santa Fe, same group of people came and visited me in Las Cruces and took me to coffee in Mesilla and said, "Hey, what do you think about this idea?" And I was like, "Yes, right on. This is a natural thing for New Mexico, and count me in." But my history, I had authored the bill to create the outdoor division. And so we had been through that exercise of creating a division in a new area, and kind of had walked through all the legislative issues that, of course, came to pass here. So that ended up becoming a very good template for this bill. And but needless to say, you can have an idea, but getting a bill passed is a different thing, and took a lot of hard work, a lot of great organizing. Kudos to all of our partners that are on this call, and Cindy, who's on this call and was my assistant this last legislative session. I can't see her, but hello, Cindy. And kudos to you all. And now my message is the hard work continues, because you can create a good idea, but it's how you give it meaning and you do the work that ultimately will be the payoff for the state. So look forward to the discussion.
So my first question, and let me say to everybody who has joined us, you can use the Q&A function to ask us questions. If you raise your hand, the way this is set up, we can't unmute you, but we will answer your questions if you type them into the Q&A, and we'll track that. Most of the people, I think, are generally familiar with the bill and the purpose of the CID. But do you mind, Senator, kind of discussing what the purpose of the CID is, and where could it be in 10 years? What is the vision that you and Representative Szczepanski envision for the CID? If it's a blowout success, what does that look like?
Well, I think what a blowout success would look like is that we're supporting creative endeavors in all corners of New Mexico, from single, entrepreneurs who have solo businesses to somebody who might end up having a successful manufacturing space, to really fields that, one thing that's important to understand about creative industries is it's easy to gravitate towards a visual artist or whatever, but in fact, it could be woodworkers, culinary, music. I mean, it's such a broad field. And so it's kind of like a beautiful plate of food, and it's how you not just pay attention to the entree, but the pieces that surround that and all. And so, which can be overwhelming too, if you hope and expect that it's going to be all things to all people on day one, because it simply cannot be. So, it's success looks like us investing in smart ways to help to really support creative industries across the state and help to collectively grow this sector.
Representative, do you want to build on that?
Sure. No, I totally agree with Senator's vision there. And I think for me, it means that what that could look like is that artists and creatives and business owners across the state would find it easy to set up a business. They would find it easy to figure out how to make that business bring in great revenue, and figure out if they're exporting products, that they could figure out how to do that in an easily accessible way. And I think ultimately it means that instead of, one of the folks I met along this journey was an artist who won first prize at Indian Market for his printmaking. And I've told this story a few times, so forgive me for those who have heard it before, but I was so struck because here's someone who is producing, world-class prints that are just incredible and taken an incredible amount of time and effort, but to ensure that his family had a living and to ensure that he was able to have benefits and make sure that he could take care of his kids, he worked during the day for a job at the state. And so all of this time for his art was all limited to nights and weekends and days off that he could get now and then to prepare for a big event like Indian Market in Santa Fe. And so my hope with this is that we can make it much, much easier for someone like him to turn his talent into a full-time living, into a great job that can provide benefits and a great living for his family. And so that to me is, how do we take these positions that people have carved as sort of side gigs or night activities or weekend things, that how do we take that and value that and invest in that as a state so that that can be valued and bring home a great living for a family. So, and that's all that person really has to do to earn that living. So I think that's ultimately my vision. And I think as a state, we've spent a lot of time investing in bigger industries, which are also an important part of the economic mix in the state. But, when we look at creative industries, and we were just discussing this with you all a couple of nights ago, which is, if we are looking at more sole proprietorship, small businesses with 2 or 3 employees, how do we make those a great quality of life, a great standard of living? How do we make that really be able to fill a kitchen table and fill a refrigerator with food and make sure the kids have what they need, rather than that being a side gig? So I think that's part of the vision. And if any state can do it, it should be New Mexico. We have one of the highest percentages of creatives in the country. We have an incredibly high percentage of artists of color. We have such incredible gifts and talents in our state. And so if we can turn up the investment into this industry, as we have in other industries like manufacturing and aerospace
Right.
and bioscience,
Yeah.
if we can turn up the investment, we can also help folks have that great living using the talents that they have and that we should be like nourishing as a state.
And what have you all seen from some of those other I'm going to say other because the creative economy actually employs more people than manufacturing in New Mexico. But how have those other industries been so successful in advocating for themselves around legislative policies that support their industry? What could we learn from what they have done?
Reena?
Sure, thanks. Well, I think it starts with education. So, offering tours to policymakers, building relationships with the executive agencies like economic development, the governor's office. And often that starts with come come visit our facility, come do a tour. We just opened a new room of our gallery or studio space or whatever that is. Come to our ribbon cutting, come see. So I feel like that is the low-hanging fruit aspect of this, which is just meeting your local legislators, inviting them to your events, getting their awareness of what you are working on in community. That is step one. And I think the senator and I experienced that a bit as we were advocating for the bill, as a lot of folks didn't really understand creative industries. They can visualize artists working in studios, they can visualize museums,
Right.
but the
Yeah.
concept of an industry that is made up of a whole diversity of creative arts and practices, it was just something new. It was something that really hadn't been talked about before in the economic lens. I think it starts there. And then I think now that we have the creative industries division, we have something really concrete to focus on, and sort of a natural opening into building those relationships. But we also have specific goals that we can map out for the future around the growth of the creative industries division, around activities that are needed in the community. And I think, if we can, one of the things we did in the process of working on this bill was we gathered all these stories. A lot of the people on this Zoom spent a lot of time gathering stories from community about projects that folks were working on, projects that had specific needs, ideas and dreams that people had. And, if we could have each of our 112 legislators have a person in their mind as they're looking at something called creative industries, a bill or an appropriation, if they could be thinking, oh yeah, that's right, Joe back in my community wanted to put that addition on, or has this vision for this community art and studio space, or has this residency program they want to do. That's right. That's what this is about. Like, if we can get to that point, then it'll be much easier to then get to the place where some of these other industries are.
So sort of leveling up information sharing and creating awareness for legislators and other policy people. I would like to introduce Mike Young, who is the lead researcher for Creative Startups and works on creative economy strategies across the US. He did one for the city of Sacramento earlier, actually last year. And many of you have met him. He has been in, I think, how many? 42 communities in the last 6 months across New Mexico.
41, but
40,
we'll add the extra
I
one,
was
yeah.
exaggerating. I apologize. And has really gotten a good handle on what are the creative industries in New Mexico. Is it digital marketers? Is it guitar makers? Is it 3D robotics designers? What is it?
Yeah, so I think that in doing this research for New Mexico and meeting people all across New Mexico, so balancing numbers and faces, it is an incredibly creative state. As Reena said, and I added in the chat, 1 in 9 people make at least part of their living in the creative economy in New Mexico, which is pretty astounding. One thing that we've discovered in our research in the last years, sort of quote unquote, since COVID, that our creative economy recovery and growth has actually been higher than any of our neighboring states, higher than Colorado, higher than Arizona, higher than Texas or Utah. And looking at the way HB8 is written, just sort of, impartially as a researcher, it's very inclusive, which I think is great because it reflects the reality of New Mexico and it reflects the reality of the creative economy. And so, like, in a dry way, whereas the way that the creative economy is defined by other states adds up to, say, 90 NAICS codes. And so for people who don't know, when we talk about data, NAICS codes are how the Bureau of Labor Statistics measures industry, right? And in the way HB8 was written, it adds up to about 142 NAICS codes that are legitimately part of the creative economy in New Mexico. And so I think that some of the huge bright spots are in the research that I've seen, the crafts, which is not a unusual thing to say, right? Like artisan crafts, jewelry making specifically, woodworking, metalworking, and also the interesting thing is sort of pure intellectual property industries. So research in the humanities actually is higher wages and salaries in New Mexico than many other regions in the US. And I think that trying to crunch these things together, what I see in New Mexico as a researcher is that it's a place where people are very passionate and have been making beautiful things for a long time, and where the idea that there's a difference between whether something is beautiful or useful just sort of doesn't exist. And that's what's so great about our creative economy. And I think it's a blend of these very, very old craft practices and these real sort of the future of really technology and everything. Like New Mexico is really good at the deep past and really good at the deep future and not super concerned with the now. And I think that's really cool. That's a really cool thing about New Mexico.
Yeah, it is. I think it's why a lot of us really love living here. And the question is then, how do we build industry around that? It's an amorphous sort of sense that we all love. But the question is then, how can we support entrepreneurs? So for example, one of the questions in the chat is, are there programs that specifically support creative entrepreneurs? And there are, and feel free to get in touch with us, Christina. We can send you names of different programs. WESST has some good programs. Arrowhead Center at NMSU has good programs. Creative Startups does workshops. But the question that Christina brings to mind as well is, what will this new division do for creatives who are trying to either learn a new skill or enter a new market or buy in bulk because their commodity has become too expensive to buy on their own? What are some of the technical assistance projects that the CID is thinking of? Can you share with that, Mike or Jeff or Reena? Anyone? Mike, you want to go ahead?
Jeff is on mute.
Oh,
Please.
please.
Wanting to say.
So this is the $1 million question, and this is literally ground floor question number one. Keep in mind, this division doesn't have any staff now. We're literally a month or 2 months away from hiring its first employee, a director. it's funded to then hire a second employee, and their first question will be like, okay, what do we do on day
What do we
one?
do?
What do
Yeah,
we do on day two?
Yeah.
And so all of these things being talked about are crucial, right? Chris's question about, what are we providing to creatives? And I think clearly the need for the division is number one, it's to provide more support for creatives out there. It's whatever it is, marketing, content development, networking. I think there's a huge fundamental need to just help them in every way, right? And then I think beyond that, boy, you can just go in a million different directions
Yeah.
about what
Yeah.
we can be doing. But I think I see, just listening to the discussion, I see is basically, kind of your earlier question, what do we have to do? Well, we have to tell everyone's story better. We have to
Yeah.
use this opportunity to tell our state story,
hmm
because that is going to help shine a light on these artists and these creatives, but also bring in more people to the state, help bring industry here. And I think we're, economic development, you kind of want to do both, but clearly this is a homegrown thing that is our wheelhouse. So communications, I think, is a super important piece of this. It's how does everybody tell their story better? How do we tell our state story better? One thing that the outdoor division has done very well is one of their 3 initial employees was a marketing person.
hmm
They constantly are putting out great marketing of businesses in the state, of opportunities in the state, programs, grants, connecting everybody through a very active email. So I know that Alice and Mike, they're already building an extensive email list that will go over to this division. So anyway, I just see us all like one big Etsy shop that, we're just gigantic, massive.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And Christina, I can also, so we can send a list of different specific programs, but
I-
one of the things that, and I see that somebody is from our SBDC, there are SBDC offices across the state. So you can Google SBDC, and they often have excellent resources for helping you, whether you're figuring out how to wholesale your product, you need to build a new website, you need to project cash flows. They're a great resource. And one of the things that I think the CID will focus on is connecting the resources that exist and enabling those resources to understand what each other is doing, so that we can not send creatives in circles, and we can also focus on what we're good at. So for example, Creative Startups doesn't help people build websites, but we do help people raise private venture capital, right? So that's a very different thing. And so one of the things that the CID will help with is getting people organized. Who's doing what? Let's not be redundant and do what somebody else is already doing really well, and creating a community around those resource providers so there's greater communication, which will also enable us to then tell our stories to our legislators and garner more support for the division as it continues to thrive. There's a question here about, can we interweave parks and rec with arts and culture? Great question, Joseph. Thank you. In the US, we don't as commonly think of sports as part of the creative economy, but globally it is always included in the creative economy when you measure the creative economy. Britain is very vociferous about including sports as an area of arts and culture. That's partly because they're fanatics about soccer or football. But it is a part of the creative economy. And most people in the creative economy today think of arts and culture as one of the things within the creative economy. And so it's one aspect of the creative industries, I guess you could say. I don't know if that really answers your question. But my next question would be for Mike. What are some of the challenges that you have seen? That we have a lot of experts, a lot of people, Cindy Graves, Sabrina Pratt, I'm looking down the list, Irene Oliver Lewis. We have some real creative economy experts. Loie is here, Rose Eason is here. How can we be supportive of the CID moving forward? What are some things, Mike, that you have seen in, maybe you've looked at, I know you've looked at places outside of New Mexico, Washington, California, Hawaii,
Hawaii,
Colorado,
yeah.
they all have very well resourced, whether it's a creative industries division or similar, it's basically that. And they're parking millions of dollars into it. What are they doing that we could learn from?
Well, that's a it's 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 a complex question. But I think that we've got a couple champions of the creative economy here. And I think that there's efforts, I know, again, just purely like in a research capacity, like Creative New Mexico is an organization that's out there if folks are interested in being advocates. I mean, one thing that is just factually true, that is interesting about this creative industries division, compared to some of the places that you mentioned, Alice, like Colorado, for example, is that there is both the creative industries division and there is the Department of Arts and Culture, it's Department of Cultural Affairs, right? And New Mexico Arts within it. Um, and um, and I think that the way that that's been set up is like a really exciting and good opportunity to collaborate and really figure out, like to Christina's question earlier, there's also Artist Inc., which helps individual artists with sort of initial business development, which is a program through that is New Mexico Arts is a partner on. And I think that what I've seen in the research that other states have done well, particularly Colorado, because it's the neighboring states, is that they have activated nonprofits in communities that are already embedded in communities and that already have a lot of trust in those communities to support them and scale them up. And because reinventing things at a state level, just based on the research, doesn't tend to go as well as supporting things that already exist.
So you're saying in Colorado,
Yeah.
and you have seen that their creative industries division identifies existing organizations and equips them, builds their capacity, lifts them up, and really leverages the trust and the history of successful service. The other thing,
Right.
as you were describing that, I remember a conversation I had with Megan Van Voorhees out of Sacramento talking about data and the data that they collect and publish that they use to convince city council to continue to fund. And so something that, and I know Colorado has a lot of very good data that they put out. I watch their annual report and it's very economic oriented and they talk about the impact of their creative districts and the impact of creatives across the state. They do a report especially on music and venues, and that data is very compelling. And so that's something that it occurs to me the CID can be doing well. What are some of the challenges that Reena and Jeff are seeing in terms of moving this? How can we help, not just challenges, but also solutions and ways that your constituents can support you as you continue to advocate so that we move past any challenges like we talked about? One, legislators just don't know enough, and so that's a challenge. They just don't have the context and understand maybe why it's so important. So we could help you on that. What are other things that we could be doing to support you? Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a great question, Alice. You know, one of the things with creative industries is that we're not going to be able to move this vision as quickly as we would like if we're not all united and talking to each other. So I think as a basic first step, in addition to getting to know local legislators and talking with them about your activities, educating them, you know, and if you work for a nonprofit that is not lobbying, that is education. And it's important for us as elected representatives to really understand what's happening in each of our communities. All of that, it can be done, and it isn't even reaching the advocacy level yet. It is educational. Come tour my facility, come meet with me so you can hear about this project. But also we need to start talking to each other across sort of subsections of creative industries. So we need music to be talking to visual arts and dance, and we need the content creators to be talking to the architects. And so we need those kinds of cross-sector conversations to start happening so that we can start, that way we're already connecting the dots and coming to legislators and policymakers as sort of a connected space. So that's one thing. I think Creative New Mexico is a fantastic organization, and it is kind of the one umbrella organization we have in the state that's really building a community for those kinds of conversations. So that's a great nonprofit organization to get involved with. But I think there's also not in every, but in many communities at the county level or the city level, there's an arts council that sometimes has access to a little bit of funding, but it's also another great networking opportunity. So that's another hub. But I think what I would say is, as a space, we all need to get a bit more connected and integrated. I will give you the lay of the land with Creative Industries Division, which is year one. We fought very hard to get this bill passed and got it passed. And we got it passed with no staff, but a grant fund and some one-time funding. So that one-time funding was dispersed into the 18 grants. It's also been used to create this plan and vision for the future. And the division was created. Year two, Senator Steinborn and I successfully advocated for the division to get staff. So that funding for that staff will become available in less than 30 days, July 1, and the division will begin that process of hiring staff. So we'll finally have people in place to execute all of these ideas and things for the first time. But now year three is a great opportunity for us to be looking at what are the needs that have been identified. What should the division really be focusing on? What is that going to cost? And for us as legislators to start talking to the Economic Development Division to start having those conversations about what's that budget needed. And I am speaking just for myself. I want to dream big. I want to sort of think about this. What's the big grand vision? We certainly are going to have to get there step by step. But what is that grand vision? How much does that cost? And so the good news is one of the hardest parts is over. The bill, getting the bill done to establish this division is done. Amazing. But now is sort of the behind the scenes and really kind of tough slog of let's build the budget for this. Let's start working on making sure the division is really doing what the communities need. All of that depends on having a really strong network in the state. Here are all of our creative industries coming united, arm in arm. They see these common needs. This is what will lift up all of this work across the state. So we really need all of you. The bill would never have passed if we hadn't had, hundreds of creatives of all kinds participating, emailing, calling their legislators, doing meetings, all of these things. And now we still need to keep all of that mobilized, especially because we want this to really work.
Yeah, it's so true. And I'll just say it again, Creative New Mexico is doing a lot of that work, a lot of the education and advocacy work, and doing really fantastic work. There is a pointed question about how might we be able to, not we, but how people who are attending this call can help maybe obtain the funds? Are there ways that you advise? I think a lot of us don't know quite how to go directly to our legislators and say, hey, this is important. Please support this. How do people do that? What's the brass tacks on that?
Well, I think right now, that the vision is still being formulated candidly, and there's not an ask that we can say, okay, here's the ask and that you should be
But
communicating.
there will be for the session, right?
But there will be. And
Yep.
but what I was going to say is where we sit right now, we know we've established a new creative division. We know we're going to be seeking continued funding for staff, for grants. So I think right now the message everybody can take is number one, research who your local legislator are. We just had an
Okay.
election last night, so you may have voted
Okay.
whether or not they were contested or not. Number two is we're very accessible. Your legislators are accessible, so don't be afraid. In fact, it's a very strategic thing to do. Like Reena said earlier in the call, be that face, be that resource of this new division with your legislator to say, just want you to know, I'm your constituent. This is what I do or aspire to do, or I support those that do it. And it's so important you fund, support this division. So I think just educating them about the need, about what you do is a great first step. And then there will be more fill in the blanks later.
Yeah.
But I want to say beyond that, I mean, I'm a lot of people talk, as we know in life, a lot of people talk about, what they're going to do, what they want to do. It's so important that you also focus on succeeding in the mission. And so I'm really making sure that we hire good people up front in this division,
Yeah.
and that we start kicking butt, because I think nothing sells like success and doing good work.
That's really true.
And so, and success for this is there will be big things that we'll do, but it will also be accumulation of thousands of little victories out there in your community and in your business. And so, and that's the outdoor division. I mean, they're just funding all these grants and all these things, and it's the accumulation of all that that's what success is looking like as a whole and as a state cumulatively. So we want to really start doing well. And no, that's our job, right? That's our job as a state is to execute this vision well. But
yeah, it's been exciting with this the past sort of 6 months work to see how strongly the community of creatives across the state have come together. We have over 400 people registered for this conference, and people are just determined to work in collaboration, to support one another, and to do what I call grow the pie. New Mexico, we often struggle with this sense of, well, there's not enough, so I just need my piece of the pie. Instead of coming in with a sense of abundance and saying, there is enough, let's create more with each other. And that has been the zeitgeist throughout this process of creative people really saying, we're in, what do you need? How can I help other people? How can I be a champion? Which will be so important because unlike, maybe, I don't know, chip manufacturing where you have Intel and they have 2,000 employees, so it feels kind of easy to have influence in the policy sphere or the economic sphere. We are, as creatives, we're very fragmented. A lot of us work on our own, or we work in a business with 2 people, or we have a day job and we do our art at night. And it's harder for us to feel like a monolith that must be paid attention to. And the only way we can get around that is through collaboration and supporting one another and being each other's champion. So I just want to say congratulations, because I feel like New Mexico, the creatives have come out full force with that attitude over the last 6 months. So it's been really fun for us.
And I want to piggyback off of that and shout out a couple comments in the Q&A that I think support this idea, because we got Arlen Nelson asking, how do cultural cultivators, digital marketers, and content creators play a part into the creative industries economy in New Mexico? We have someone asking, how can architects, landscape architects, and environmental graphic artists participate in the creative economy? The reality is that y'all are the creative economy already.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you are already, and just like Alice is saying, everyone needs to see themselves not in these silos, but as part of a creative block, in order to advance this idea of the creative industries. And in traveling around the state and, meeting with all the great folks that I met with, and Rashawn, my colleague, and Lonnie from the Cultural Center. Yeah, it's so cool to see people in these rooms who are many different kinds. And then one thing we heard over and over again is like, oh, this is so great. Like, we should keep doing this. We should keep getting together. And yeah, yeah, that's just something that I saw in traveling. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I think to be maybe too on the nose, but I think in the past, arts and culture for a lot of people has felt sort of out of reach. It has felt, maybe 20 years ago, it felt like we were talking about opera and museums. And one of the exciting things about the creative economy is it takes a very different approach. And it thinks of, yeah, opera and museums are awesome and they're a part of it, but so is landscape architecture, so is urban planning, so is a soccer team. And so it's as Reena said, it's a bigger tent. It's a little more inclusive, and a lot of the magic happens when those people start working together, and across those sectors. And that's something that New Mexico could be extremely good at, because we have a greater history and depth of different cultural sort of norms, traditions, heritage, languages, and we mix those with future technologies, new channels of marketing, different ways of thinking. We can stay at the forefront of some of the really interesting cutting edge markets that are evolving. So New Mexico is poised in a lot of ways to do extremely well as a creative industry leader. So Loie is asking, and Jenjoy has hi Jenjoy, hi Loie, a similar question. So I will sort of spend 2 minutes and then we'll make sure we leave some time to wrap up with any final comments from the senator and the representative. But Creative Startups has spent about 8 months now, I guess, working as the contractor, building the strategy for CID. We call it the business plan. And we can't release things. We're not allowed to release details. We got in trouble when I sort of shared a little minor detail. So I'm not going to do that to myself again. But the plan that will be put forward and published will be ready July 1st. I don't know when EDD will make that available for the public, but it will include a vision, as stated by New Mexicans, so not us. It's what we're hearing from our communities, and a budget and a series of suggested programs and grant proposal or grant projects, etc. But to be clear, then, as the senator mentioned, the hiring process, or maybe, sorry, it was Reena, the hiring process to put in place the 2 staff will begin, I think, maybe in August or September. And so it's going to take a little while, and then we go into the session. And of course, we need to work all together on making sure that the division has resources, continues to have resources. The coming year, it will have $250,000 in grant dollars. So it's not a whole lot of money, as you can imagine, for a state our size. And much like outdoor recreation, the goal is to demonstrate how important the division is over the first few years, so that legislators see the impact in their own communities, see the job creation, see the vibrancy in their own communities, and continue to provide support to that division so that it can flourish over the coming years. So our job has really been to try and figure out what is the business strategy for that. And that should be ready. Like I said, we turned that in June 30th, and then the EDD will publish it soon thereafter, I guess. I don't know. So I hope, Loie, I answered your question, and Jenjoy too. There are a couple more questions. We have just a couple minutes. So if anybody has a question, go ahead and put that in if you don't mind. And then I'll ask the senator and representatives to say some concluding comments. Hi, Michelle. You can hear I'm still getting over it. I had to cancel a lunch. The public do not understand the distinction of New Mexico arts. Oh, it's such a good question. This is such a great question. So one of the things So Michelle is asking, what is the difference between the Creative Industries Division and the important work that the Department of Cultural Affairs and within that New Mexico Art? What is the difference? Why do we need both? What's going on with that? The difference is that the Creative Industries Division is responsible for creating an economic environment and the resources and tools that enable creative economy people to thrive. Private businesses, so it could be a company like Ideum that is based in Corrales, which makes touch screens for large museums. Not really arts, they do software, they have woodworking, they have metalsmiths who work there, but they're not really artists. And so they wouldn't really fall under New Mexico Arts as something that they would fund.
Chloe,
So
can
that's,
I'm sorry, Alice, can I dive in? I
yeah,
want to be even a little more specific. So
okay.
our cultural affairs division in the state of New Mexico really is very specific in what they do, as is our film division, as is our outdoor division. And so these missions clearly complement each other, but like the cultural affairs department of the state of New Mexico really manages museums. That's most of what they do and what they wanted to do. This will creative industry certainly plays a role with museums and artists and showing their work and but so it's a real specific delineation point where one ends and then the other begins, whereas as Alice is saying, this supports the whole economic enterprise, the creation aspect, the business aspect. Cultural affairs, though, is very specific to museums. And the other thing is like film in Hawaii. Film is a very big part of creative industries and their creative industries division, but we already have a very successful film office in New Mexico, which is actually another division of the Economic Development Department, which is where this division is at. Alice mentioned EDD, that's short for Economic Development Department. That's where this division is. It's a division along with film, along with outdoor, along with border. And so, so film is not part of this, even though it is in some other states. So it's a great question, kind of like where do these lines blur? Where do they complement each other? And certainly there's some overlap, but there's also very clear lines in the law about what each of their divisions are.
Yeah.
I just wanted to help.
No, I think that's so helpful. It's so helpful. Yeah. Other questions? Well, then I will say thank you to everyone for joining us. We really appreciate your time this evening. It's a lovely evening outside, so thanks for being indoors on Zoom with us. And I'd like to hand it off to Representative Szczepanski. If you have any last thoughts or words of wisdom about how we can support the new division.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, honestly, to be on a gathering like this, it was a distant dream 2 years ago when we started this process. So as Jeff mentioned, it does feel it's like full circle. It's very exciting to be speaking in a venue like this. I would just say, please don't doubt that each and every one of you is needed in this process to advance creative industries in New Mexico. And I am fully of the opinion that more is more, right? So I want us to not get caught up in some of the, like the last question that was raised is important, and we need to think about that, but let's also keep pushing forward, because more for creative industries is also more for DCA, and it's more talent to work in our museums, and it's more for DCA also supports so many of our arts nonprofits that are so important. And so I think if we can all just think about how can we start to connect more of the space, how can we start to interact more with policymakers so they really understand what creative industries are, and all the creative industries that are probably just down the road from where they live that they are not necessarily aware of. So please don't hesitate to get involved. And Creative New Mexico is a really critical organization to this, I would say. And if you'd like to be on a list, if you'd like to sort of take your advocacy and involvement to the next level, I did put my email in the chat. I will put it in the email and chat again. And feel free to send us an email at that address, because we'll keep a list, Senator Steinborn and I, of different volunteers that want to speak at
Awesome.
hearings and things like that. So thank you all so much for what you do, and thank you for being with us tonight and showing up for this really important project.
And I wanted to just logistically, we got another couple panels coming up after this. If people are still interested in hanging out, we have data for empowered community organizing and creativity with Brian Osterloh and Nady Dominguez. And then we also have creative entrepreneurship for social impact with Rashawn Ahmad and Shara Greenberg. And also all of these things, like on the Creative Industries Division website, you can see the exact industries that are laid out, and on the New Mexico Arts website, you can see the exact mission of the New Mexico Arts and the DCA. So there's many resources, and we'll try to put together a bunch of resources also to follow up with people on the call, just to keep building on these things that we talked about here.
Yeah. Senator, did you want to have any closing remarks?
Yeah, one last thing that we kind of missed earlier, which is the legislation we passed creating the division has three tranches of grants. It's not just about supporting creatives, it's also about supporting organizations that support creatives, like our arts councils, but it could be a new nonprofit that supports it. So that's a second class. And number three, it's governmental funding to actually communities, could be tribes, a governmental entity for infrastructure that maybe creates an arts and culture district, wayfinding signs. So, I mean, this is where, Reena's grand vision of, you can start spending lots of money on big infrastructure pieces as well as grants to creatives. So those are the three pieces of the legislation, and that's certainly a vision we want to hang on to. So if you're, whatever area you fit into, there really is a place for you within this whole effort and how we're thinking about moving this forward in our state. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Great. Well, I'm sure people will have 1,000 questions. I still have 1,000 questions, and I've been doing this work for a while. So, but stay in touch. And if you would like to be in touch with anyone at Creative New Mexico, Creative Startups, with the senator, with the representatives, you can always email us directly, and we will be sure to put you in touch or try to answer your questions. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate your time this evening. Good night.